Leading to Here. Extraordinary stories from everyday leaders.
Welcome to Leading to Here. This is a podcast series where we spend a little time with some of the amazing people that we've met and worked with at Think in Focus over the last 8 years, as we help individuals, teams and businesses get out of their own way. I'm Rich, and with me is Ricky.
Hello, everybody.
Our guest today is James Knight, a talented and tenacious leader who is Chief Executive at InServe. James started in the world of retail financial services, doing a range of high-profile roles at Telefonica O2, William Hill and the RAC, before landing in the world of drink dispensing. James, welcome.
Hi, morning, guys. Great to be here. It's a very kind introduction of you.
Well, it's great to have you along, James. Thanks for your time. Before we dig into things, could you just tell us about your current role? Tell us a little about your current role and a little about InServe as well.
Yeah, for sure. So, I'll start with InServe. I mean, InServe is a fabulous little business that I'd never heard of until I started looking at this role a few years ago now. But it's a great little business that actually impacts so many of our lives. I suspect if you ever go into a pub or you go to a club or a major stadium or you go to a festival, as I was at the weekend, the Isle of Wight Festival, we do all of the installation and then maintenance work for beer dispense principally. So effectively everything from the cellar, from the keg, all the way through to the tap. We ensure that we keep Britain pouring, as we say. We keep the pints flowing. So that's our job. So as I say, we impact probably about 70% of the UK's pubs and clubs. And I've got the pleasure of being as you say, the chief exec of this business. So I look after this business, and it's a great business to be part of.
Okay, so what we like to do on Leading to Here, James, is try and go quite a long way back. So we like to go all the way back to when you were growing up, try and learn a little bit about, what made you, and what were some of the influences on your life back then. So take us back to your childhood. Where did you grow up? What was it like? What was going on in your environment back then?
Well, I was in Bristol, so a fair few miles away from where I am today. So that was home, a place called Stockwood, which is a classic kind of working class suburb of Bristol. And so my parents were great, but it was a challenging environment. I think I always remember back to my parents being quite challenged by money, and kind of we'd get by, and we certainly weren't poor, but equally, I remember coming home from school and asking for the school trip, and I was only able to kind of pick one for that year, and the rest, they just couldn't afford. So it was a challenging environment, I think, for my parents when I was being brought up.
So they were careful with money. They were trying to make sure everything worked out. Had you got siblings, or was it just you?
Yeah, so I'm not sure they were careful with money. I think that was part of them, actually. But no, yeah. So I've got a sister, Lisa. So she's I always call her my baby sister, actually. And I was thinking about this podcast this morning as I was getting ready, and I was thinking, actually, she's not really my baby sister anymore. She's just about to turn 40. But I always see her as my baby sister. But there's just the two of us, so we're pretty close, actually. So that was us.
What were mum and dad doing? Were they were working, I assume? Were they both working? And how did you watching them do whatever they did? What sort of impact did that have on you?
Yeah, I mean, they were both working. So mum was a nurse, and dad was a production line supervisor, really, in Cadbury's. So I always remember dad used to do a huge amount of night shifts, and I always used to remember him coming home and smelling chocolate on him. Because he was, the chocolate lines literally kind of, were all over him almost. Yeah. So I always have this really interesting and fond memory of dad literally smelling very sweet when he came home. And mum kind of did alternates as well. So she would work during the day and do a huge amount of nursing. Dad would work at night. So I think they just kind of crossed over their paths, and we saw one or other of them as as they were either coming home or going to work. So they were, I mean, I was saying they're still alive, so they're not dead, but they were incredibly hardworking and are hardworking people.
Sounds
And I
it.
think that probably gave me, a real sense of you have to graft, you have to work
Yeah.
hard, you have to focus. And as I say, money was pretty tight for them actually. Mum was definitely a spender, Dad was a saver, and therefore they eventually actually just split up because they couldn't match. But it's a different part of my life. But my sense from an early age was that you have to kind of get out there and work hard. And so actually, I think my very first job was washing cars up the street. I used to go and knock on neighbours' doors and see if I could earn some cash for some pocket. So, but I think it's been bred into me almost that you've got to work hard.
Are you still doing the car washing, James? Because mine's due a spruce up.
I quite enjoy it. That sounds nuts. I do every now and again go out. I mean, of course, you chuck it through a car wash. Right? I actually find it quite cathartic going and washing a car. And I know people find it a real chore. I quite enjoy it, and it does take me right back to my roots. I remember, getting a fiver for doing a really bloody bad job at washing people's cars.
But something happened there, I assume, though, where you thought, look, I want to earn some money. I want some of my own money, and what can I do? So, kind of bit of how old were you then? So it's quite entrepreneurial, I'm guessing, at a young age.
Yeah, I mean, I was probably 12, 13, something like that. And I was doing multiple jobs actually from a pretty early age. So I would do car washing. I had a paper round, although I hated that actually. I didn't have a passion for a paper round, but I used to do car. I remember, most Sundays I would do 4 or 5 cars on a Sunday, and I used to think I was, super rich, getting 25 quid on a Sunday.
Yeah.
That was huge amounts of money at that point in time, and huge amounts of money for me at that age, because as I say, Mum and Dad didn't have too much money to kind of splash out, and they did a fabulous job of trying to keep, the family going, as it were. But they weren't flush with cash. And so, if I wanted to go and get some sweets, or I wanted to go and get a magazine that I enjoyed, I had to kind of buy that for myself. So I had to be reasonably self-sufficient.
Yeah. So you're doing that. You're sort of standing on your own 2 feet a bit financially at that age. But what was school like? What sort of student were you? How did school life work for you?
Yeah, school was pretty tough actually. And I think it was tough in the sense of I wasn't particularly good at making friends. So I didn't have a huge amount of friends at school. I had a very, very close-knit group of friends, probably, 4 or 5 people I could literally count on one hand, people that I would say were my friendship group. And it was tough because particularly when I was going, actually primary school was probably slightly better. I had a slightly broader group of friends, but I was really nervous about going into secondary school. And my secondary school that I went to, I ended up going to because my best mate went there, and it was actually outside of our district. I don't know how schools work now, but it was outside of our district, so I wasn't eligible to go there. And Mum and Dad had to fight incredibly hard to get me into this secondary school because my best mate Stuart was going, and that was somebody that was really important in my life. But it was a tough gig actually, and I was quite studious. I mean, I was pretty. I wouldn't say I was academic, far from it, but I knew that if I wanted to get on in life, I needed to get some decent grades.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't prepared to kind of fail. But I equally, I wasn't kind of the classic A-star student that was sat there swatting up. I was probably somewhere in the middle of that.
Yeah.
But I just knew that I needed to get some decent grades to be able to get on in life. So I felt like it was a tough gig.
And were Mum and Dad sort of saying, hey, James, and Lisa, you've got to work hard at school, study, you've got to push yourself. Were they doing that kind of thing? Or had you just absorbed that from looking around and thinking, hey, if I want to be independent and have a good job, I need to work hard here?
No, I mean they were pretty challenging parents in that sense. I mean they were, I certainly remember Dad in particular was very keen that we got a really good education and that we worked really hard. Mum was slightly more relaxed, although I would emphasize the word slightly more relaxed in terms of how we would kind of get homework done, and I would be able to probably wrap around my finger a little bit more, whereas Dad was like, no, it's 6 o'clock, you're doing homework and you will sit there and you will do it for the next hour. He's pretty straightforward sort of guy. So
pretty firm like that.
Yeah, very firm. Yeah, I mean he's mellowed in his old age actually, and I always say to him now he's nearly closing on 70 now, and he's like super chilled now. But he certainly wasn't when I was younger. He was a pretty tough taskmaster at that age.
Tell me about teachers, which teachers were influences for you, which helped you kind of step up and excel in terms of making the most of the education that you talk about?
I had two that came to mind. So one was a primary school teacher called Maggie Smith, and she was fierce actually, and really strict with people. But I managed to, I think, get on the right side of her at least. And she was in our primary school. She wasn't my form tutor, but she kind of took me under her wing a bit. She was, I think, I imagine that her main skills were in kind of English literature, but she got me a real passion for learning, and she was super tough, super engaging. So she was, quite good at sticking an arm around my shoulder and sticking a boot up my backside. So in my kind of very formative years in primary school, it was definitely Maggie Smith. And then in secondary school, I had a fabulous tutor called June Russell, and Mrs. Russell was a kind of food tech. I don't know what they call them now, but a kind of food tech type of teacher. Yeah. And again, a really tough character, somebody that I managed to get on well with and supported me all the way through school. And actually, I saw both of them, interestingly, in different contexts, but saw both of them outside socially in slightly later life. Yeah. I think June had a WI thing. I used to fly birds of prey when I was younger. So she wanted something for her WI. So that was the kind of relationship I had with my teachers. But those two in particular were very formative.
So what happened then after school? So it sounds like you did pretty well. You weren't perhaps the top student, but it sounds like you did pretty well. What were you thinking about as school ended? Had you got any ideas about what you wanted to do, go on and study or work, or what was happening then?
Yeah, so at the end of secondary school, I had a few choices. So I either had the choice to go on to A levels and then ultimately go on to university, or leave at that point in time. And I'd always wanted to become a vet, actually. So all the way through my younger years, I wanted to become a vet. And of course, that takes kind of 7 years of education and a huge amount of university degrees. And actually, when I was going through my secondary school years, I decided that veterinary college wasn't for me. I didn't want to go and become a vet any longer. Right. And actually, I needed to go and earn some cash. That was important. And I took the decision that I didn't really know where I wanted to go. I knew that I didn't really want to go into university. I didn't want to go on to A level, so I didn't. Yeah. And actually, many of my teachers at that point in time were trying to persuade me to stay on and stay and do A levels and then go on to university. It just wasn't for me. I wanted to kind of go and learn something and kind of get out into the workplace. So I left school and Dad was very clear that, if you're going to earn some money, you need to go into insurance or banking. And at that point in time, they were pretty good jobs. So I ended up going into the banking world.
It's an interesting, observation, that, James, because I think there's a lot of young people today feel the same sort of pressure from schools and colleges, which is, stay on, do A levels, go to uni. But, it's not for everyone, as you say, is it? And I wonder if it's, someone who's now a chief executive of a company like you are, is that a piece of advice that you would give to kids to say, hey, there are other ways?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think, certain professions require you to go to uni. Certain professions don't. And I think leading a business, it doesn't necessarily require you to go to uni. I mean, it's interesting, actually. I'm just going through a master's degree because I feel as though, I want to prove to myself that I can get the piece of paper. Yeah. But I'm mid-40s now doing that rather than doing it when I was younger. And my advice to youngsters is you've got to go with your heart, right? Your heart and your head have got to guide you. And if it doesn't feel right, and at that point in time for me, it didn't feel right. It didn't feel right to go to uni. I didn't feel like that was the angle I wanted to take. I wanted to get into work and almost kind of learn my trade, whatever it was going to be, through work. And I didn't want to do the academic thing. Now, people can criticize that. Plenty of people do. To your point, I think there's plenty of pressure on people to go to university, but hopefully I'm a good example, or at least a reasonable example, of somebody who is able to get to, a very decent position in life where I haven't had that formal education. As I say, I've chosen to go back in to do some formal education, but that's more to prove to myself that I can get the piece of paper rather than needing to do it.
Leading to Here. For mental models and tools for leaders, visit our YouTube channel, Thinking Focus.
So you didn't go to uni then?
Nope.
So what happened? I assume you got stuck into the world of work. Where did you go?
Yeah, I mean, I left. I left straight after GCSEs, and Dad had said to me, you've got two areas you can go to. You've either got to do insurance or banking. Those were at those points in time. They were really good careers as far as at least he was concerned. And actually, to be fair, they were good industries at that point. And probably still are. I chose banking, so I thought, right, well, I'm going to go in. I'm going to go into the banking world. And I had an interview in a place called Bedminster in Bristol. For a cashier position, retail cashier.
Yeah.
But that was my kind of route in, and I worked out very quickly that I'm terrible with cash and I can't count. It was. I kind of I mean, I did this cashiering role, and I was honestly awful at it. It's fair to say I was really bad.
It's funny you say that because I had my first job was pretty similar, and I was also awful at it. Couldn't balance, couldn't do any of that. So.
No.
So you did that then. So you were doing that for a while, and I assume you were earning a bit of money though, weren't you? It might not have been too enjoyable, but you were earning a bit of money. Did you have any fire flames or burning embers of ambition starting to come alive as you were working in an organisation and thinking, oh, maybe there's a career ladder here, or was any of that happening?
Yeah, it kind of was. I mean, honestly, I didn't do it for that long. I mean, I really was that bad. I mean, they took me through a disciplinary, actually. I was that bad. I mean, they gave me a first written warning for how terrible my balancing was. So I actually thought I'm going to get fired from this pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And so I thought to myself, I need to work out what on earth I'm good at. And I actually started talking to the sales guys, and it was the kind of corporate sales guys, and then some of the consumer guys. And I was like, I could do that role. Just get me off this bloody counter because I can't count, but I reckon I can talk to people. And then once I'd moved on to more of a relationship manager role, I realized actually I'm pretty good at this. I can talk to people, I can engage with people, and actually I can sell some stuff. And that's what I did. And I very much then got my confidence around actually the retail banking world is probably a place where I could really do well. And I went through my early career kind of going up, if you like, through the sales channels and into leadership roles pretty rapidly, actually, I guess, in most people's careers, and got reasonably senior in my early life in the banking industry.
You always come across as someone that's got a natural confidence. Was that always the case, or did that grow as you sort of found your feet?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because internally I'm actually not that confident, it's just how it manifests itself. And I think there have been so many points in my career where I have thought, how on earth am I in this role and how on earth have I got to this position? So
it's that imposter syndrome type thing.
That classic imposter syndrome, exactly that. And actually the external manifestation of my confidence probably came from a place where I thought if you kind of give enough confidence and I'll work out how I do this role when I'm in it, I reckon I can stick around and do it pretty well, and then I'll learn how I do it, and then hopefully nobody will find out. So it was a classic imposter syndrome, but I've had it all the way through my career. But I actually think people talk about that as a negative. I think it's a really good thing because I think imposter syndrome gives you the ability to think deeply about yourself and where your development areas are. And really make you focus on it. I mean, the risk is that you aren't open about it, and then you don't talk about the development areas, and you don't seek the development. But if you know where your areas of development are, that's a great thing.
I find what you say really interesting because I think if you haven't got it, imposter syndrome, there's actually something wrong.
Yeah,
because I think it's very normal. I think what you said there is interesting because being vulnerable about it and being open to it, because I think that's a challenge for people, isn't it? Because people don't want to get in a role and say, hey, I don't know if I can do this. So I think what you observe, and probably what many of us have done, is you hide it away rather than, looking to be a bit more vulnerable. So as you went through, you said you got to management positions, leadership positions quite quickly. What was that like as a younger person that's progressed quite quickly and you found yourself leading people? How did you feel when you got that responsibility?
Yeah, I mean, I loved it to start with. And I think, leading people and feeling as though I'd got on and getting into my first leadership position was a real privilege. But I was, undoubtedly a really, I probably emulated my dad hugely. I was a real tough taskmaster. I imagine the people that worked with me, in the early years absolutely hated working with me. In fact, I'm almost sure of it, because I
Mm.
was highly demanding, and at many times perfectly unreasonable about the demands that I was making on people. But I had really high standards. I had high standards for myself, and I held everyone else to those high standards. And I think you mellow through life, right? When you get to the
Mm.
position I'm in now and the many roles that I've gone through, you do mellow. But certainly in the early years, I was pretty tough to work for. I wouldn't have wanted to work for me, it's fair to say. But it was a real privilege. And now I look back and think, God, I'd love to go back to some of those people and go, I'm really sorry that you had such a young leader who really didn't know what he was doing, but was trying to get on in life. But, I've learned so much from it.
We'll try and come back to that, because there's a lot in there about how you've learnt to adjust your style, and what's the right time to be harder, what's the right time to pull back a bit, and all those things. But so you kind of work your way up through the bank, a range of different positions in leadership. What came next? What was the next leap that you then decided to make?
Yeah, so I got to the dizzy heights, as it were, of a director of Nationwide Building Society. And it was just about coming to, it was just post the financial crash. And Nationwide was quite an interesting building society, because it's the largest building society in the country. It acts like a bank, but it's a mutual. And I was one of the very first senior execs to be brought in externally. They'd always brought people up through the ranks, as it were, in quite a classic.
And how old were you at this point?
So I would have been mid-20s at this point.
Pretty young then, James. Yeah, really young, yeah.
Yeah, mid-20s, late-20s, I would say. So yeah, I left actually when I was about 30, 31. So I would have been just, late-20s. So yeah, it was an interesting place, because, as I say, I was one of the very first senior execs they brought in externally, because they had a desire to change the culture and to be. We used to have they used to have a phrase, which was they were the nicest building society not to do business with, because they were a classic mutual, fabulous with customers, but never kind of closed the sell. So they brought people in like me to really get a commercial edge to their business. But in truth, my style probably didn't match theirs at that point in time. And I think I probably tried to take them on too quick a journey to become a much more commercial outfit, and very much like some of the big PLCs, too early on in their business cycle.
Yeah.
And actually, at that point in time, I felt as though I'd done the banking thing, and the banking crisis had brought around a huge amount of regulation as well.
Yeah.
And regulation, and that area of regulation was becoming more and more oppressive in the banking world, whether it was retail environment or elsewhere. And I just felt like I wanted to break out of that. And actually classic retail was where I thought, I could probably add some value. So that's where I joined Telefonica, so O2 in the UK, within their retail team.
And so you go there then, you move from, I mean, interesting you talk about Nationwide. So you move from that culture into Telefonica. What was the difference in culture when you went there? And how did that then begin to affect your leadership style and your learning as a leader?
Yeah, so I mean, it's so different, because the banking world was pinstripe suits and ties. I mean, I remember rocking up to O2's head office in Slough, and I was in a pinstripe suit, shirt and tie, and my boss, who then became my boss, walked out in jeans and a t-shirt and went, "Wow, you're definitely here for an interview, aren't you? You do stand out." Oh my goodness, this culture is so different. So it was a much more modern, much more forward-thinking environment, as opposed to quite a stuffy environment in which banks and building societies operate in. So it was a real culture shock, but actually I loved it, and I couldn't get out of wearing a suit of some sort, probably for the first year that I was there. So
did you slowly take the tie off then and undo a couple of buttons and stuff?
Well, he made me take my tie off for the interview, because he said, "You're just overdressed and you look like somebody who's going to a funeral." So okay, fair enough, I'll take that advice. Thanks for that. So I took the tie off there and then, and kind of never put one on again. But I couldn't get out of the suit. It was really odd. I remember walking around London. We were looking at new shops, and I was in a suit. Everyone else was in jeans, and I couldn't bring myself to even do jeans and a shirt. Now you can't get me out of jeans and a shirt,
Yeah.
But it was really odd how much that culture had kind of displayed itself. But the leadership skills that I needed in the banking world were quite different, actually, to a retail environment, because I was dealing with much more much younger people, much more dynamic individuals, and frankly, people who would never have taken my leadership, my quite blunt style at that point in time. They simply wouldn't have taken it. I mean, they'd have given me all the feedback in the world around it, and I worked that out pretty quickly because they were, younger and frankly just didn't almost kind of look up to authority and go, yes, sir, no, sir, 3 bags full, sir. I mean, that's
Yeah.
just, they just do play in that world. They'll happily tell you you're an idiot.
And how did you adjust then? Because this is a real, like, in your face, oh, this isn't going to work. My way of doing things isn't going to work here. I've got to adjust. So how did you do that?
Well, the first thing is you've got to be self-aware. And I go back to that imposter syndrome. Whilst I may have had challenges through my early leadership career, in terms of my own style, and I knew it, I was very self-aware. I was very aware of that impact that I was having, and I still am today. I mean, it still kind of persists today, but I realized that this style is not going to work. And if I want to be successful in this environment, I need to adjust and I need to be sensitive to how people are reacting. And so you start to look at, from a leadership perspective, your impact and your style on them and how people react to that. So, literally the words that I say, I'm a pretty big guy, so I'm 6'5", and I'll say closing in on 100 kilos. So I'm a pretty big guy, and therefore that comes with a natural presence. And the words I say, along with that, stature, if you like, and the stature of the role, come with real power, and you've got to be aware of that. So I was acutely aware of it going into O2. I was acutely aware that actually my style needed to adapt, and so I just tried to test and learn a few things that might work and might work slightly better. And so I actually just became, which sounds odd, just friendlier with people, and just a bit of a nicer person, and just kind of asking people, look, how do you like to be led? What do you want to get out of this? What do I want to get out of it? We've got common goals that we want to hit here, but kind of what do you need from me? And I started to head into a world where, rather than demanding and telling, more asking lots of questions and just being really inquisitive with people and finding out what made them tick.
How do you balance this need for feedback in terms of, am I hitting the right tone with people versus your natural impatience to want to get stuff done?
I think that natural impatience will always be there, right? So I think I'll be.
It's not a fault by any means. It's what's got you where you've got to, isn't it?
It is. I think it's about you've got to keep your finger on the pulse of these things and get a real sense around whether you're pushing too hard or not. And even now today, I think I'd probably take it up to the edge with people in terms of their abilities to kind of push through at the pace that I want them to, and being as demanding as I am. Actually, an old leader gave me a really good analogy, which was an emotional bank account. And they used to say to me, James, you've got to, and it's from my banking days, right? So he used to say to me, look, you've got to make sure that you never go into debt with somebody. So you've got to put some emotional credits in the bank account first, and you can take some debits out of that bank account at some points in time, but you can never take somebody overdrawn, because as soon as you take them overdrawn, that's it, you'll bust with them. And that's always stuck with me. I've got to put more emotional credits in the emotional bank account with an individual before I can take some debits. And they'll allow me to take some debits as long as I don't take them overdrawn. And so, that's kind of always worked with me. It's always stuck with me. Debits and credits back in my banking days.
Oh, God, yeah. Well, you're talking to 2 ex-bankers here, so we feel your pain.
Back from your cashiering days as well, James, So I mean, was there, you mentioned there that, an old sort of boss had said that to you. Was there anyone up to this point in your career that you'd looked up to that had demonstrated some of the skills and abilities that inspired you?
Yeah, there was a guy called Paul Seaman, and he's a great friend now. In fact, I'm godfather to his son, but he was a senior director in my banking days, and he was incredible. He was in Barclays. He was incredibly kind to me. He was a real tough guy and really had a very similar kind of pace and energy that I had, much older than me, but also had a humility to him that I remember. Actually, he promoted me once. I know exactly what age I was. I was 21, and I'd become a senior bank manager. And I remember my salary was about 19,000 at the time. I mean, it was hardly a senior manager's salary at that point in time. But I thought, right, I had in my mind, I want to get the same salary as my age. I want 21 grand. And I asked him for 21 grand. He said, no, not happening, James. No, don't ask again, type of thing. And then I got a promotion with him into a senior role. And I remember him giving me this promotion and talking about the salary he was going to give me. And I burst into tears with him. And he just came and gave me a hug. And I was like, I feel completely vulnerable here because I'm in tears and I'm not a crying sort of person. And you're now hugging me. I mean, this is the weirdest situation we've ever been in. And for somebody who was actually really tough and very straightforward talking and incredibly candid about where you weren't going and doing well, he also had this beautiful side to him that was able to give me a hug as a human being and just go, it'll be okay. Yeah, this is all good, you know. So I learned lots from him, and he was incredibly kind to me about knowing where my development areas were and allowing me to explore them with him. And we built up a really good relationship where he was able to give me, frankly, very straightforward feedback, and I would take it and I would ask questions around how I could learn. And I think you always need somebody like that in your life. You need somebody to give you a break in the first instance, and you need somebody that you trust enough to be able to say, look, you're on the wrong track here, try this or try that. And he was very kind to me and allowed me to do that.
Leading to here. If you're a leader and have a story to tell, reach out at hello@thinkingfocus.com.
Would you say that through your experiences in your career, you've developed a thick skin and the ability to be resilient, more so than you perhaps would have had just in your own character?
I think resilience, yes. Thick skin, probably less so. And I think what I mean by that is I think I'm an incredibly resilient individual. And I think that's built over many years. And there's been plenty of tests, if you like, to that resilience. And thick skin in that sense, yes. But equally, I would say I'm still very acutely aware of my impact on people. And so if you're thick-skinned, you can easily kind of let things just roll over you and almost ignore how your impact on other people is having an effect on them and people around them. So I try to remain as open to that as I possibly can do, you know, very much watching for the signs of, am I pushing too hard here? Because I know that I can. I know that I can be pacey. I know that I can be demanding. Am I pushing just a bit too hard here? And I think if your skin is too thick, you might ignore some of those signs and then fail with individuals.
So 4 or 5 years, roughly, at Telefonica?
Yes.
Yeah. It sounds like a really interesting learning curve for you that you went through about yourself as a person, as a leader, working with different individuals, adapting your leadership style. And then again, you make another interesting move because you then move to William Hill. So a retail business, a fascinating kind of business model. What was the temptation there that got you to think, right, this is the kind of route I want to look at next?
Yeah, I mean, do you know what? I can make up something really cool about why I decided I'd move, and it was purely motivated by money. I mean, no joke. I mean, so I left O2. I had a great boss actually. She's now the UK CEO for Snapchat, so she's got a very cool job now herself.
Yeah.
But I left her, and she was a great boss, and I left her, and I decided actually I want to go and make some big money, and I got this headhunter phone me. And said, look, we've got this opportunity to go and be a director of operations. So reporting into an ex-co member, that was the first time that had happened with William Hill. And I'm not a big gaming and gambling guy at all. I mean, I might take a flutter on the
Grand National or something.
That literally is my lot, you know. So I didn't know anything about this industry. And all I knew was that they were offering me about double what I was being paid at Telefonica. And I thought, I'm going for this. This is great, you know.
Yeah.
And so I took the move, and literally day one that I walked into that place, I knew that it was the wrong culture for me. I knew it was the wrong move, and I thought to myself, Christ, I've got a choice here. Either I resign on the spot and just say this isn't for me, and I'll go elsewhere, or I make it look like, you know, I can do 18 months, and then I elegantly kind of leave at that point in time. And actually, I took that second option.
So what you said, you walked in the door day one, you knew it wasn't right.
Yeah.
What was it that wasn't the right fit?
I think William Hill, and actually probably the gaming and gambling, and I'm taking this from my perspective. I'm sure they've changed actually, and that industry has changed. But it reminded me hugely of the banking industry. Very stuffy, very kind of white, pale, and stale.
Oh, okay.
And it was just a culture of macho, really old school culture that a very traditional culture is probably how I would describe it.
Right. Yep.
And one that I knew that I didn't enjoy any longer, because I'd had the beauty of being in a very modern, contemporary culture with O2.
Yeah.
And so, whilst actually there were huge opportunities for me to learn, and I learned a lot through those 18 months, and particularly operating at, again, a more senior level, because I always think that no matter what choices you make in life, you have to take the learning from it, and have to develop from that position and take everything you possibly can from that learning.
Yeah.
But it just culturally, it was misaligned with me. And equally, I think when you see, every week I would have a number of letters arrive on my desk from people's families who had been, candidly, somebody had died from suicide, because of their gaming and gambling addiction. That gets to you. And I just realized I don't want to be part of this. I don't want to be part of a world that's impacting on people's lives, not in a positive way. And that's not to say, by the way, that people who go and place a bet, most people who do that are in a really good space. But there are a number of people that aren't. And that just didn't feel like a world that I wanted to be part of, or, frankly, aiding and abetting.
Were you surprised by that? Because, I mean, there's a lot more in the media now, isn't there, about the struggles and challenges that people have with gambling?
Yeah.
But I guess once you go and step into that world and you work in that world, did that actually take you by surprise, the severity and the numbers of, letters or things that you get?
I mean, it's at a different scale. And I think whilst in the media now, it's much more prevalent and people are much more aware of it. I think it's certainly at that point in time, it was huge, and it was a real surprise to me. And I just didn't feel like I was adding positive value to people's lives, our consumers' lives, the people that were actually going into our shops. And, it's a massive role. And I had 12,500 people working with me within the retail environment, 2,500 shops. It was huge. So it was kind of almost on paper, it was the best role you could possibly have. But I knew how many lives I was impacting in not a good way in the world. And that just didn't feel right to me.
Just didn't sit with you.
Well, I was, an old CEO that left fairly quickly, actually, after I joined William Hill, said to me, the only people that are going to walk out of here better off are going to be you and I. And that had a real sniff of pigs' noses, trotters in troughs for me. And it just didn't fit with my values, and it didn't feel like the culture I wanted to be part of. And I didn't, even that sentence now still fits with me. And I go, it's just not me.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is for some people, isn't it? Some people are quite happy working in those environments and enjoying that. But you said it didn't fit with your values. So but you delivered a big infrastructure project, I think, when you were there, and you had a lot to do by the looks of it.
Yeah, I mean, it was a huge role. I mean, it was at the time when the national living wage had just come about, so there were some real additional taxation burdens coming through, and the sorts of savings that we needed to make within the retail operation were huge. So it was probably one of the largest modernisations and restructure programs that the industry had ever seen.
Yeah,
and we needed to get multiple millions of pounds worth of savings out of that business. So it was a huge restructure in that business. So yeah, I mean, there was plenty to do, and there was plenty of opportunity. But I think even with that, you have to at some point in time realise, if this doesn't fit with your culture and with your values, it's for all the money in the world and for all the opportunity that creates, it's not an environment that I'm willing to sit in.
And you mentioned that values clash, which is something that I think many of us have felt in our careers, when you're in a culture and you think, this does not fit for me. So what would you say your values are then? Because clearly that made you perhaps think about that at that stage. So what are your values that, if you said my top 3 about the way I want to live, work and all those things, what are those, James?
So I think, my values are around integrity. First and foremost, I think you have to have integrity.
Yeah.
And I think you have to live and breathe by that. I think you have to care about people. I really value people.
Yeah.
And really value the contribution that everyone makes, from the, again, it's cliche, but from the cleaner to the CEO, it doesn't matter. Everyone's adding value to an organization. And I think if you miss that point, I think that's not great. And I think it's about, do you really genuinely feel like you are adding value to the world, if you like? So, whether that's customers or the environment or whatever it might be, do you feel like you're adding a positive value to the world? So those are the things that kind of sit with me. And it probably took me quite a bit of time to realize that. And actually, William Hill was that turning point for me around, no, I actually do have these values. And for somebody who was very money motivated, and again, I go back to my childhood where mum and dad didn't have very much money. So I was money motivated. I didn't want to have the life necessarily that they had. I didn't want to have the struggles they had. But my values always stepped forward ahead of that. And certainly the William Hill experience, made me realize that.
So it was time for a move.
Yep.
So you decide then, okay, I need to work in an organisation that's different to this one, perhaps got the culture that you're looking for, has values that you can believe in. What happens next then, James? Were you approached, or was it you actually got active and went out in the market?
No, I was approached to head over to the RAC, which was much more aligned with those values. So again, if you think about, am I adding value to the wider world? Well, we're rescuing people, right? So aside from perhaps going into the emergency services, rescuing people sounds right up my street. It was a very core business. I think the RAC's got a great brand about it.
Yeah.
I had no idea actually when I was
very trusted.
Yeah, exactly. It really fitted with my culture. It really fitted with my values. I had no idea that it was private equity at the time. I mean, I've got this little story that when I came into the business, with private equity, for those that have never gone into private equity, you get offered share options. And I had no idea what these things were. In fact, I said to my boss at the time, are these worth kind of buying? He was like, snap up everything you can. I was like, okay, right, I'll do that then. And so I just kind of took it as, okay, fine. If they're offering, I'll take.
I'll buy.
Take everything. Yeah. But I never had a realization that it was private equity at that point in time, or what private equity was all about. All I knew was the RAC rescuing people, helping people out, a really good culture where people matter. The technicians at the roadside really matter, and they're doing such a brilliant job to keep Britain moving, if you like, in that context. That's perfect. That's right up my street. I don't know what this role is, but I'll go and do it, and that's what I did.
And you're director of roadside operations, I think.
Yeah, so I came in initially. So a new management team had come in, a new CEO, a guy called Dave Hobday, who you guys know, came into the business, and I joined just a couple of months after he joined. So that he was looking at a brand new executive board. I came in and reported to one of the execs initially and looked after all of the roadside operations. So effectively everything that was the service end, if you like, of the business for the first kind of 6 months, and then got promoted onto the board after about 6 months as the chief operating officer, and did that for the next kind of 4 or 5 years.
So how was that private equity ride then? Because it can be very challenging, can't it? Very exciting, very dynamic, very challenging. So how did that shape you through that period, and how did you find the ride?
I loved it, actually. I loved the ride. I mean, genuinely, it was fast paced, it was energetic, and again, I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know private equity can be incredibly ruthless. I just knew that if you work hard, they'll reward you for it, and if you deliver, they'll reward you for it, and that was fine by me. I'm up for the hours, I'm up for the hard work, and up for the pace. It was very pacey. I mean, there's no doubt about it. It is about as far away from kind of some PLC glacialness, if you like, if that's even a word. It was pacey. It was energetic. There was a destination in mind, and it was very clear that we needed to move some stuff and get some genuine transformation going on very rapidly. So, I loved it. And I would always say to people, if you're up for hard work and pace and, a fair few long hours, it's fair to say, do it. It's great, but it isn't for everyone, for sure.
And James, did that then, I'm thinking about your highly demanding personality and your, this about caring for people. How did you reconcile that with finding the right people that wanted that kind of pace, energy, that were more aligned to the way you wanted to work as opposed to more glacial? approach where, well, we'll do it next week type thing?
Yeah.
How do you reconcile that?
So I think you've just got to be really honest with people about this, right? And you've got to say, look, this is pacey. And I love it because people go, no, I'm up for pace. I'm really up for pace. And then you go, are you really?
Do you really know what this is?
You really know?
Yeah, there's 1,500 pace and then there's 100 meters pace. Let's be clear.
You got it. So, it was about talking to people and being honest about, this is the journey we're on. We have a very finite amount of time. With private equity, generally, you're either going to IPO the thing or sell it at some point in time. And there is a clear timeline generally set around that, usually 3 to 5 years. So we had 3 to 5 years in which to move this business forward at real pace and get some genuine transformation going on. And I knew, certainly from my William Hill days, that, big transformational projects take time. I mean, it's not something you can, put your shoulder into and it just moves.
Yeah.
These things in big organizations, when you are looking after, in the case of the RAC, 4,500 people, and many of those are technicians who, frankly, are a little bit more skeptical about life. They're field based. They've got a lot of time on their hands.
They're like being a technician. Don't they? They're not necessarily interested in the business's progression and growth and all the rest of it.
Yeah, but do you know what? Rightly so. And they were focused on dealing with the customer that they arrived at and making sure they rescued them. But what we could see was the state of the vehicle car park at that point was changing. EVs coming along.
Yeah.
The way in which you rescue people, the digitalization of the world at that point was really escalating. And actually, I took the RAC through the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, that just really escalated the whole digital sphere for all organizations, really. But the world was changing and we needed to change with it. We were 120 years old at that point as a business. And, really the business model hadn't changed hugely in that 120 years. We still sent a technician out. We still rescued people. And that was kind of how it went. But in a private equity world, it's about, how do you really get efficiencies through? How do you save that money and bring your cost base down, but deliver even better service to our customers? And so that was really tricky. So it needed people who were up for the pace, genuinely up for the pace, up for the challenge, but wanted to work in an environment which culturally is aligned to values of wanting to help people.
If you enjoy Leading to Here, listen to our sister podcast, The Question Is, by Thinking Focus.
So what did you learn about yourself in this private equity period that you were working in? What were the things that you learned about yourself, but also you as a leader?
So I think, one of the biggest things I learned about myself is my resilience is high. So I'm very resilient. I think you have to be in a private equity environment.
Yeah.
But I also recognised that I needed to, and actually, to be fair, one of probably the most influential bosses I had was Dave, the CEO of the RAC. Very early on in my career, within the first couple of months, he said, you're going to need to get some coping mechanisms around you, James. You're going to need to kind of have a toolkit of coping mechanisms. And I had no idea what he was talking about at that point.
Yeah.
This is fine. I can cope with this. And what I realized was, you really do. You need a number of different tools that you can pull out to cope with the stresses and the strains and the pressures that a big operational role and an operational role in a private equity context puts on you. And so that was probably one of the biggest learns that I had, which was making sure that you do take genuinely that big step back and go, right, I'm in the operational weeds of it. I've got, 10,000 breakdowns coming through today, and a number of them are going wrong, and it's all, we're all going to hell in a handcart, right? Okay, but I'm the boss, and therefore I've got to take that step back and think, how are we going to get through the next, few years, not just the next few hours? You learn to build in those coping mechanisms, you learn to build on the resilience that you have, but thinking about, how do you really, when the pressure's on, be the leader of people? And people do look to you. When you've got that sort of level of people working with you, they look to you for that leadership. And as I say, going through the COVID-19 pandemic, people genuinely do look to you and go, so now what next, boss? And so calmness and actually taking the time and having the ability to step back, think and stay calm is critical.
Yeah, particularly through private equity and through COVID, which makes it doubly hard. But you mentioned in there coping mechanisms. So just give us an insight. What are a couple of your coping mechanisms that give you the energy to keep going, that keep you going when times are tough, that keep you going when the pressure's on? What are a couple of things that you've built into your life?
So I'm a real fan of having really good habits.
Yeah.
And actually, this has come much later in my life, actually, probably through the RAC days and stuff that I've developed since then. But having really good daily habits, I think, are really important. So, people talk about work-life balance, and I kind of go, well, if you're operating at a senior level, your work-life balance isn't going to be in check in a meaningful way. That's just life. If you operate at this level, that's life. But
Yeah.
you do need to make sure that you do the things that you enjoy. So you've got to be able to firstly stay connected with family and friends and take the time to do that. So
Yeah.
I do. My daily habits, I go and do some form of exercise every day. So, I was up at 4:30 this morning and I was in the gym by 5 o'clock and I did 45 minutes. I have a stacked day to day, but that's important to me.
Yeah.
Not because I want to be, some hench guy. It's because getting to the gym and throwing around a few bits of weight or going for a run is a really good de-stressor. And it allows me to think. It gives me time when I'm not with anyone else and it allows me to think.
Yeah.
Something else I do every single day is journal.
Okay. Yeah.
So I sit down for 20 minutes and I get a pen and a paper out and I put my phone on Do Not Disturb and I journal every day and I just let my brain empty out onto a page and I reset at the start of the day and think to myself, what sort of person do I want to be today? What stuff have I got coming up? How do I need to think about interacting? I think about my personal life and my business life and I just write it down.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I do every day is meditate. So I take 10 minutes every day and I stick a headset in and I do a bit of meditation. And again, it just allows you to calm your brain.
Yeah, really, really interesting. Thanks for sharing those because I think that what you're talking about there is small things that really help you cope with the everyday, ground you, remind you who you are, remind you of your values, and also feed your energy source to enable you to keep going. So I think that's something lots of people struggle with in this high-pressured world that lots of people live in, whether that's their job, whether it's family expectations, whether it's whatever. I think it's something that there's a lot to learn about, is to stay in the moment and find some time to reconnect every day.
But I think for me, it's this protecting those things that are important to you. So you've made the modification that means I get up at 4:30 to make sure I can fit it in because the nature of the job you have is so demanding. You're spinning many plates across the organisation and satisfying your board and the people that you have to answer to, as well as the team around you and supporting them. So I think it's this. These are important, and we're going to protect them. And if I have to compromise in order to make them happen, I'm going to do that. I think that's really powerful.
It's incredibly that, and you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, these are things that I will never not do. They are absolutely red lines for me. One of the foundations I think of everything is sleep, ironically.
Definitely.
So I do get a good night's sleep. I mean, the old days of, you can live on, I mean, I used to live and breathe this, you can live on 4 hours a night of sleep. Rubbish. I mean, I go to bed at a reasonable time. I'm, by 9 o'clock, I am asleep. That's it. You cannot get hold of me because I know that I need to get up early, but I need at least 6 or 7 hours of sleep because if you don't have a good night's sleep, your executive functions literally are compromised.
Yeah, it will affect your health.
Yeah, and I don't have time to put my habits in play that I know I need to do in the morning because that sets me up for a good day.
Yeah.
And I simply won't compromise on those things come hell or high water. Those things happen because they're an important now foundation for me to ensure that when I'm in work, I'm the best version of myself that I can possibly be. But if you don't have those foundations in place, you I certainly lose my way. And I'm just not a good version of me at that point.
Well, but again, I think what you're saying is in order for you to operate at and function at a high level and perform at a high level, you've learned that these things need to be in place because that will enable you to do it. And I think that is really interesting for everybody that's listening to this, irrespective of what role you're doing. What are the things that you need in place that will allow you to be the best version of you every day, whether that's in your role, at home, whatever it might be. And I think that's what you're talking about there, James.
There's a really great book, actually, that I would employ anyone to read, and it's called Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Yeah.
And he really talks about this habit stacking and finding ways to kind of have these really good foundations in place. And that's a great book, actually, a really easy read. And I'm not a great reader, but for anyone that wants a good read whilst they're on holiday, read Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Thanks, James. Good book recommendation.
Good little advert.
Put that one in the notes. So as we come to the end of our time, just tell us a little bit more about, you're at InServe now. This is your first chief executive role. How did that feel when suddenly you see that you are chief executive? What did that inspire within you?
Well, it's inspired a couple of bits of emotion, I guess. First I was frightened to death. Imposter syndrome came right over the top of that, and I was like, "Oh wow, wow! Actually, this is quite incredible. How have I managed to do that? Then I've managed to, pull the wool over somebody's eyes." And with just immense pride, because what more for somebody who's ambitious? What more can you ask for than to lead a company and be at the apex, if you like, of that company? But also, I was super humble. Because I have a real responsibility. I have legal responsibilities. Buck really has stopped with me now. I have responsibilities for not just the 1,000 people that work in this organisation, but I have responsibility for their families and making sure that we keep them employed and keep them in really good shape, and this business in really good shape. I take really seriously in terms of my responsibility. So it was an awesome feeling mixed with, wow, how on earth have I managed it? I've done it again. I've managed to get another.
I've really done it this time.
I've really screw this up, But I was incredibly proud. But actually, I came into this organisation hugely energetic. I have a real. I'm blessed to work with some amazing people, and I'm blessed to have a team of people around me, and who work in this organisation who absolutely love what they do, and we are. As I said earlier, we're keeping Britain pouring, particularly in these hot summer months. Well, it's threatening to be summer, isn't it?
It's threatening,
with the Euros and everything else. We're genuinely adding value to people's lives, right? And and ensuring that they have a great time, whether it's summer or winter. And that, I have a team of people in this organisation that I feel incredibly privileged to work with, because they love the job that they do and they are passionate about delivering for our customers. And that, you can't ask for more than that. When you've got a great team of people around you that are passionate like that, that passion rubs off. It's great to be part of.
So thinking about your career, who would you say has been the biggest influence and why?
Well, if I talk about my professional influence, I would say my old boss, actually, the CEO of the RAC, Dave Hobday, and he's a real Marmite character, right? So many people have gone past Dave and been tuned up and spat out by him. But I go back to that original guy that I talked about in Barclays, a guy called Paul Seaman. Dave had a real warmth towards me. I mean, he is the toughest boss I've ever worked for. He is the most demanding boss I've ever worked for. He's crazy. I mean, there's so much about him that it is crazy. But actually, what he had for me was time, and he knew that I wasn't the polished individual coming into that role. He knew I had development areas, yet he took the risk, and he was patient with me to a point. And he spent an awful lot of time really working out who I was, the buttons to push, which often he would push buttons that he knew that would stimulate me in a different way. But yeah, he was just a really patient guy, and really actually very ironically very caring. And I say ironically because for people who have worked for Dave, I don't think caring and Dave Hobday probably go together, but he's been such an influence on me in a positive way. I learned so much from him. And therefore, I'm hugely grateful. It's funny, actually, you get these, Diary of CEO, right? Podcasts like this, of course.
Yeah.
And Stephen Bartlett sends out these cards, these questioning cards. I don't know whether you guys have ever done them, these kind of talking cards. And I was on holiday, and my other half and I now use these cards we've been together like 16, 17 years. We use these cards now just for a laugh over the dinner table. We were on holiday, and a card came up around who's been the most influential person in your life. And I immediately went, Dave, because he's had such a profound influence on the leader that I am today, and enabling me to get to the position I'm in. So I'm hugely grateful. And I texted him actually at that point and went, here's the card, and you're the person. And I just want to say thank you. And I think that was probably quite a nice moment for the two of us.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, definitely. Brilliant. So, James, thank you so much for your time and for your story and joining us today on Leading to Here. We like to finish with 3 quick-fire questions. So, quick-fire question, quick-fire answer. So, are you ready?
I am ready. I'm nervous, by the way.
Ready and nervous. That's fine. That's fine.
Go for it.
Looking back, what's the one thing that you're most proud of?
The journey I've been on. Do you know what? I'm proud that I didn't go to university and I didn't get A levels, and yet I managed to get to where I am. I'm proud of that. I mean, I think I hope that it inspires others that you don't need to have a formal education to get on in life. You can make it to the top of a business, and you don't need A levels and you don't need uni. You can do it with sheer hard work. I mean, it'll be a bumpy ride along the way, but you can do it.
One thing you do differently if you could go back?
I would have just been nicer to people when I was younger. When I was a young leader, I'd have just been nicer to people and had more time for them.
And one thing that gives you the energy to keep going?
I guess, my other half, actually, Alistair, he's, my absolute energy in life. He's completely different from me and somebody who is the most laid back, chilled guy you'd ever wish to meet. But he inspires me every day because I just want to be like him. I want to be he's the nicest person you'll ever meet, right? He is genuinely the nicest person. I just want to be like him. So he inspires me to just be a better person in life. And so teaches me huge amounts.
Cool.
Thank you, James. Wonderful to talk to you.
Pleasure. Great to speak to you guys.
Ricky, really interesting session with James. What stood out for you?
Well, yes, absolutely. And I think what resonated for me was this imposter syndrome. So this kind of comes across as such a confident. When you meet him in person, he's the same. He's very imposing. He's tall, and
he seems very sure of himself, doesn't he?
Yeah, but he's got this. He talks about this lack of confidence, but he offsets that with this inner belief that says, "But I'll work it out." And what he's built up is a whole history of doing that. So he's got this kind of recall memories, recall past, where he's gone tick, 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 because it doesn't matter what you throw at me, I'll find a way.
What did you think as well when he talked about, because it was really interesting to me, he talked about not having gone to university, not having gone down that route of study, but just getting out there, working hard, learning as you go, pushing yourself, that kind of thing. Because I think there's a real strong message in that for people today, because there's so much pressure. And I know this myself because I've got kids of this age. There's so much pressure on them from college, from school, to go to uni, get a degree. And lots of them are kind of like, I'm not sure that's what I want to do or that's right for me. But they feel pressured into it.
Well, I think the important thing is it's a pressure point in their life that they're perhaps not ready to make that decision. So it almost like for some, it comes too early. He even said himself, he's doing his MSc just to prove to himself that he can do it. And having two children, one that went to university and lived that life and enjoyed it, and one who went and got an apprenticeship. So the answer to this is there are options, and you don't have to follow the mold, that you can make it.
But he's a great example, isn't he? Chief executive, great career. He didn't do it. And I think
his intelligence is measured in other ways. From paper rather, practical experience.
I think the message for us is, we don't have lots of 17-year-olds listening to this podcast. That's not quite the demographic we get. But it is the people that are listening to it. Just think about your children, the standard format that we tend to see for them of college, uni, off you go. You know what? Might not be right. It doesn't mean they can't have a tremendous career and a great life doing something different. So I thought that was interesting from him.
And I think leaning into that, it's about the people that work for you. Beware of how you judge them if they haven't followed a path you perceive to be the right path, because they'll find their own way. And James is a testament to, the journey might be a little bit higgledy-piggledy, but I'm going to get there. And he's reached, the level that he has with InServe, which is brilliant. Which means it does boil down to what he also said at the very beginning: the influence of his father in terms of, and his mum, of course, hard work
ethic.
You get your head down, you work hard, and it will pay off. And I think he's proven that. What about you, Rich? What did you take?
Well, all those things. I think just one other thing from me, which was when he talked about coping strategies. I observe in the work that we do. I see it in myself. I see it in lots of other leaders that we work with, that it takes a big toll on people, having not even people that are particularly senior, just everyone in the world of work today. It's demanding. It pushes people to do more with less. And then if you throw into the mix that you've got family life, you've got kids, you've got other relatives that perhaps depend on you for various things, it's a lot. And for people to deliver whatever level they're working at, you need to have some kind of coping structure around you. And I thought it was really interesting that he'd worked out that he had to have some foundations in place to have a good day. He needed to get up early, get to the gym and do some exercise. He needed to sit and journal for 15, 20 minutes. He needed to just sit and meditate. And meditating doesn't mean, anything complicated. It's just sitting and breathing and just being mindful. He'd worked out he needs that as a foundation, as a building block, which will then allow him to perform to the level he wants to perform to through the day. And I think there's a message in that for everyone that feels that pressure of extremely busy days that bleed from one into another without a break, that we do need some time to reconnect. And I thought hearing that from someone that is a chief exec of a company was very interesting.
And I think the exclamation point to that is this protected. He protects those. They're sacred to him.
They don't change.
I will never not do these things.
Non-negotiable.
I think is the way he phrased it, because they are crucial to his kind of survival in the environment that he operates. Getting the exercise, gets that blood pumping ready for the day, and then he closes the day with the meditation and the journaling in order to kind of almost square the circle. And I never really understand that term, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And then I think the final thing for me was this influence from one of his early bosses, where he was able to be candid, yet caring. So yes, I do need this from you. Yes, I do need you to pick up the pace or do more or whatever. And actually, I'm going to give you feedback along the way. But he didn't do it in a way that dehumanized it. He did it in a way that James felt like cared for and was able to kind of give his best in that environment. I thought that was a really interesting piece, particularly when you offset that against James's acknowledgement in that final 3 quick fire round, that I wish I was nicer earlier on.
Yeah, he realised, didn't he? Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us today on Leading to Here, and we'd love to have you along next time when we'll be talking to John Dawson from Star Surgical. We'd also love it if you can like, share and subscribe to Leading to Here. If you'd like to know more about us at Think in Focus, then please feel free to drop us a note at hello@thinkinfocus.com, or of course you can visit us online at thinkinfocus.com. And we look forward to having you with us next time on Leading to Here.
Leading to Here. For more episodes, visit us at thinkingfocus.com/leading to here.